The Kepler station's holding bay reeked of fear and antiseptic. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the reinforced transparent aluminum barrier, watching the small creature huddle in the far corner of the containment cell. 3 weeks had passed since the rescue operation on Zirian Prime, and the alien cub still refused to approach any of the station's crew members. "Any progress today?" Commander Hayes asked, stepping beside her with his morning coffee steaming in the recycled air. Elena shook her head, her reflection overlapping with the trembling form beyond the barrier. "The same. It snarls at anyone who comes within 2 meters of the cell." Dr. Chun tried offering food again this morning. The poor thing nearly tore its throat out trying to roar at him through the barrier. The creature was no larger than a house cat, though its anatomy suggested a predatory species. 6 limbs ended in retractable claws, and bioluminescent patches along its spine flickered between deep blue and angry red, depending on its emotional state. Currently, those patches burned crimson as it tracked their movements with large, intelligent eyes that held far too much awareness for something so young. "What do we know about its species?" Hayes asked, though Elena suspected he was testing her knowledge rather than seeking new information. The Zirian survey team classified them as apex predators before the mining operation went dark. Adult specimens can reach 2 meters in length and possess remarkable problem-solving abilities. They're pack hunters, highly social, and according to preliminary scans, this one shows signs of advanced cognitive development despite its age. What Elena didn't mention was the growing list of injuries they documented during their medical scans. Healed fractures in the creature's limbs suggested repeated trauma. Scarring patterns indicated deliberate mutilation rather than natural wear. Someone had systematically tortured this young being, and the psychological damage ran deeper than any physical wound. "The miners?" Hayes asked quietly. "Most likely. The rescue teams found cages, Commander. Dozens of them. This little one was the only survivor." The commander's jaw tightened. Humanity had strict protocols about interference with developing species, but those same protocols demanded intervention when genocide was occurring. The mining corporation responsible for Zirian Prime would face tribunal proceedings, but that provided little comfort to the traumatized creature before them. "Sir," Communications Officer Park's voice crackled through the intercom. "We have a situation. The transport ship Endeavor is requesting emergency docking. They report critical life support failures and are carrying a full passenger manifest." Hayes straightened. "How long until they arrive?" 37 minutes, sir. They're requesting priority access to Base 7. Granted. Have Dr. Morrison prepare the medical bay for potential casualties. Elena, I need you to coordinate with the xenobiology team to ensure proper quarantine protocols for any alien passengers. Elena nodded, but her attention remained fixed on the small creature. As if sensing the change in atmosphere, its bioluminescent patches shifted to a deeper blue, and it pressed itself further into the corner. The next several hours blurred together in controlled chaos. The Endeavor limped into dock with hull breaches and failing atmosphere processors. 63 passengers of various species disembarked, including 12 humans, 27 Altarians, 18 Centaurans, and 6 vegan traders. Medical teams triaged injuries while engineering crews assessed the transport's damage. Among the passengers was Marcus Chun, no relation to Dr. Chun from their medical staff. A tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His passenger documentation listed him as a freelance xenoarchaeologist returning from a dig site in the Outer Rim. What made Marcus unusual wasn't his profession or his destination. It was his absolute silence. Elena first noticed him during the medical processing queue. While other passengers chatted nervously about their near-death experience, asked about repairs, or complained about delays, Marcus stood motionless. He submitted to medical scans without comment, produced his identification when requested, and followed directions with mechanical precision. But he never spoke a word. Dr. Morrison approached her after completing the passenger screenings. "Elena, I need to discuss one of the passengers with you." Marcus Chin shows no signs of physical trauma, but his neural scans are unusual. Unusual how? Significant activity in regions associated with trauma processing, but also heightened development in areas linked to empathy and pattern recognition. I've never seen readings quite like these. His stress indicators suggest chronic hypervigilance, but he's maintaining remarkable emotional control. Elena filed the information away, more concerned with managing the station's suddenly double population than analyzing a single passenger's psychological profile. The creature in holding bay remained her primary concern, especially since the increased activity throughout the station had sent its distress indicators into the red zone. She returned to the holding area near the end of her shift, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The creature had retreated to the absolute furthest corner of its cell, patches strobing between red and blue in rapid succession. Its breathing came in quick, shallow gasps that suggested panic rather than aggression. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, settling into her usual spot against the barrier. "I know it's been loud today, lots of new people, but they're not here to hurt you." The creature's eyes fixed on her, but its patches remained agitated. Elena had developed a routine over the past weeks, sitting quietly for an hour each evening, sometimes reading reports aloud, sometimes just maintaining a peaceful presence. The creature had gradually stopped snarling at her approach, but progress remained minimal. Tonight felt different. The creature's distress seemed deeper, more primal. Its small body trembled with exhaustion from maintaining constant vigilance against perceived threats. Footsteps in the corridor caused Elena to turn. Marcus Chun stood at the entrance to the holding area, his expression unreadable. He held a small device in his hands, some kind of scanning equipment she didn't recognize. "Can I help you?" Elena asked, rising to her feet. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he approached the barrier with slow, deliberate movements. The creature's patches flared brilliant red, and it pressed itself against the far wall with a soft, keening sound that broke Elena's heart. But then, something extraordinary happened. Marcus knelt beside the barrier and placed his palm flat against the transparent surface. He closed his eyes and remained perfectly still. The device in his other hand began emitting a soft, rhythmic pulse, barely audible, but somehow soothing. Minutes passed. Elena opened her mouth to ask what he was doing, but something in his posture warned against interruption. The creature had stopped keening, though its patches remained agitated. It was watching Marcus with the same intensity it had shown Elena, but without the obvious fear. Gradually, incredibly, the creature's patches began to shift from red to blue to a soft purple Elena had never seen before. Its breathing slowed, and its rigid posture relaxed marginally. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at the creature. For a moment, being and human regarded each other across the barrier with perfect stillness. Then, Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a small object, a piece of crystalline material that caught the overhead lighting in fascinating patterns. He placed the crystal against the barrier and slowly rotated it, sending dancing lights across the cell's interior. The creature's eyes tracked the patterns with evident fascination. Its patches shifted to a warm golden color, and for the first time since its rescue, it moved voluntarily closer to the barrier. Elena held her breath as the creature approached within a meter of Marcus. Its movement remained cautious, ready to flee at the first sign of threat, but clearly driven by curiosity rather than fear. Marcus continued, rotating the crystal for several more minutes before carefully storing it away. He stood with the same measured movements he'd used throughout the encounter and looked at Elena for the first time. She expected him to speak, to offer some explanation for what had just transpired. Instead, he nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and understanding, and left as silently as he'd arrived. The creature remained near the barrier for another hour, its patches cycling through colors Elena had never documented. When it finally retreated to its resting area, it settled in a spot closer to the barrier than ever before. Elena spent the rest of her evening updating her observations and cross-referencing passenger manifests. Marcus Chin's documentation told her nothing useful. Standard identification, routine travel history, unremarkable academic credentials. But something about his interaction with the creature suggested expertise far beyond archaeology. She made a note to speak with Commander Hayes in the morning. The creature's positive response to Marcus was the first breakthrough they'd achieved, and Elena was determined to understand why. Late that night, security recordings showed Marcus returning to the holding area. He settled into the same position beside the barrier and remained there for 3 hours, occasionally producing the crystal to create light patterns for the creature's entertainment. The being's distress indicators dropped to their lowest levels since rescue, and its patches maintained the warm, golden coloration for extended periods. Most significantly, the creature began producing soft vocalizations. Not the aggressive snarls it typically directed at other staff members, but melodic sounds that the translation software couldn't interpret. They sounded almost conversational, as if the creature was attempting to communicate with its silent companion. Marcus listened to these vocalizations with evident attention, occasionally tilting his head or making subtle gestures that seemed to encourage continuation. He never spoke in return, but his body language suggested a level of engagement that transcended verbal communication. When Marcus finally left, the creature positioned itself against the barrier where he'd been sitting. For the first time since its arrival, it fell into what appeared to be peaceful sleep rather than the exhausted collapse of constant vigilance. Elena reviewed the recordings with growing fascination and concern. Marcus's ability to calm the traumatized creature was remarkable, but it also raised questions about his background and training. In her experience, such intuitive understanding of non-human psychology required either extensive study or direct exposure to trauma-related behavior. She scheduled meetings with both Commander Hayes and Dr. Morrison for the following morning. The creature's well-being remained her primary concern, but Marcus Chun had introduced variables that demanded investigation. His presence represented either an extraordinary opportunity for the creature's recovery or a potential security risk to the station. The next morning brought new complications. 3 more transport ships requested emergency docking due to equipment failures in the same sector where Endeavour had encountered problems. The station's population swelled to capacity, and every available space was converted to temporary housing. Elena's morning visit to the creature revealed continued improvement. Its patches showed stable blue-green coloration, and it approached the barrier immediately upon her arrival. When she spoke softly, it responded with the same melodic vocalizations it had directed at Marcus, though with less confidence. "Good morning, little one. I see you had a peaceful night." Your new friend made quite an impression. The creature tilted its head at the mention of Marcus, and its patches brightened noticeably. It moved along the barrier as if searching for something, clearly looking for its silent companion. Commander Hayes arrived as scheduled, his expression grave. "Elena, we need to discuss your passenger friend." Security ran deeper background checks on all emergency arrivals. Marcus Chin's identification is legitimate, but there are gaps in his history that concern us. What kind of gaps? 3 years missing from his academic records. His colleagues at the University of New Geneva claim he was conducting field research, but they have no documentation of his location or activities. Then there's this. Hayes handed her a data pad showing surveillance footage from various space stations over the past 5 years. In each clip, Marcus appeared in the background during incidents involving traumatized or rescued alien beings. Always in the background, never officially involved, but present at moments when breakthroughs occurred. He's following a pattern, Elena realized, seeking out cases like ours. The question is why. His academic credentials don't explain this level of expertise with traumatized non-humans. We're running deeper security checks, but in the meantime, I need you to monitor any interactions between Chun and the creature. Elena nodded, though part of her rebelled against treating Marcus as a potential threat. The creature's positive response was the first real progress they'd achieved, and she was reluctant to interfere with something that was clearly beneficial. That afternoon, she stationed herself in the observation post overlooking the holding area when Marcus arrived for his second visit. His routine remained identical. Slow approach, kneeling beside the barrier, extended periods of silent communication. But this time, Elena noticed details she'd missed initially. Marcus's breathing synchronized with the creature's within minutes of his arrival. His micro-expressions shifted subtly in response to changes in the creature's bioluminescent patterns, suggesting he was reading emotional cues invisible to Elena's trained but human perspective. Most remarkably, he seemed to anticipate the creature's movements, adjusting his position fractionally before it shifted location. The creature, for its part, displayed behaviors Elena had never documented. It arranged small objects in its cell, pieces of bedding, food containers, debris, into complex patterns while maintaining eye contact with Marcus. The arrangements seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if it was attempting to communicate abstract concepts through spatial relationships. Marcus observed these arrangements with evident fascination. He occasionally nodded or made subtle gestures that encouraged the creature to continue or modify its work. Elena began to suspect she was witnessing the early stages of a communication protocol far more sophisticated than simple comfort-seeking. When the session ended, Marcus remained in position for an additional 30 minutes while the creature settled for sleep. Only when he was certain it was resting peacefully did he rise and leave. Elena made her decision. Regulations demanded she report suspicious activity, but her responsibility to the creature's well-being took precedence. Marcus represented their best hope for understanding and potentially healing the traumatized being in their care. She would continue monitoring his interactions, but she would also find a way to learn from his methods. The following evening, she waited in the holding area when Marcus arrived. He paused upon seeing her, but showed no surprise or concern. Instead, he settled into his usual position and gestured for her to join him beside the barrier. The creature emerged from its resting area immediately, patches cycling through what Elena now recognized as anticipatory excitement. It approached the barrier eagerly and began its ritualistic object arrangement while maintaining eye contact with both humans. Elena watched Marcus's responses carefully, beginning to identify the subtle cues he was reading. The creature's patch colors weren't random. They corresponded to emotional states, but also seemed to indicate specific desires or needs. Its movements had meaning beyond simple restlessness, and its vocalizations carried tonal variations that suggested linguistic complexity. For the first time, Marcus broke his silence. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but the creature's immediate response suggested it had been waiting for this moment. "Hello, little one. I understand you've been alone for a very long time, but you're safe now, and you don't have to be afraid anymore." The creature's patches blazed with warm gold, and it pressed itself against the barrier directly opposite Marcus. Its vocalizations became more complex, almost conversational in their rhythm and intonation. Marcus turned to Elena. "It's trying to tell us about its family. The patterns it creates represent pack structures. It's been grieving, but also hoping we might understand its social needs." Elena stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his attention returning to the creature. When he finally responded, his voice carried a weight that spoke of experiences far beyond academic study. "Because I recognize the signs of someone who has lost everything and learned to survive in silence. This little one has been protecting itself the only way it knew how, by pushing away potential threats before they could cause more harm. But it's tired of being alone." The creature seemed to understand their conversation, its patches shifting to softer blues and purples. It began a new arrangement of objects, this one more complex than any Elena had observed. Small pieces were grouped into what looked like family units, with larger arrangements surrounding and protecting smaller ones. Marcus nodded slowly. It's showing us its social structure. These patterns represent safety, protection, belonging. It's asking if we can provide something similar. Elena felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. You've worked with traumatized beings before. The gaps in your academic record. You've been doing unofficial rehabilitation work. Something like that, Marcus acknowledged. There are a lot of broken beings in the galaxy, and very few people who understand how to help them heal. I've learned to listen when others can't hear. The creature completed its arrangement and settled beside the barrier, patches glowing with what Elena now recognized as contentment rather than simple calm. For the first time since its rescue, it appeared truly at peace. Elena made a decision that would change everything. Would you be willing to work with our team officially? This little one trusts you in a way it can't trust the rest of us. If we're going to help it heal, we need to understand what you understand. Marcus considered her offer while the creature watched them both with intelligent eyes. Finally, he nodded. On one condition, we do this at its pace, not ours. No schedules, no forced interactions, no medical procedures until it's ready. Trust takes time to rebuild, and it's been broken too many times already. Elena agreed immediately, recognizing the wisdom in his approach. As they sat together beside the barrier, the creature began vocalizing again, soft, melodic sounds that seemed to express gratitude and tentative hope. For the first time in weeks, Elena allowed herself to believe they might actually succeed in healing this remarkable being. With Marcus's help, they might teach it to trust again, to believe in the possibility of safety and belonging. The creature settled into sleep with its patches glowing warm gold, finally, secure in the knowledge that it was no longer alone. The following morning brought unexpected challenges that would test the fragile trust beginning to form between the creature and its caretakers. Elena arrived at the holding area to find Commander Hayes in heated discussion with a woman in corporate attire she didn't recognize. Dr. Vasquez, this is Director Sarah Kim from the Colonial Development Authority. She's here regarding our rescued specimen. Elena felt her stomach clench. Corporate involvement usually meant bureaucratic complications that prioritize profit over welfare. Director Kim, how can I help you? The director's smile was professionally pleasant and utterly cold. Dr. Vasquez, we're here to transfer the Xerian specimen to a proper research facility. Our xenobiology division has extensive experience with predatory species, and, frankly, a space station is hardly appropriate for long-term care of such a dangerous creature. Dangerous? Elena couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. Director Kim, this is a traumatized juvenile that weighs less than 5 kilograms. It poses no threat to anyone. That's what concerns us, Doctor. Adult specimens of this species are apex predators capable of taking down creatures 10 times their size. This juvenile will eventually reach maturity, and when it does, your station lacks the containment facilities necessary to ensure public safety. Elena glanced at Commander Hayes, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Commander, surely we can. Dr. Vasquez, Hayes interrupted carefully. Director Kim has legal authority in this matter. The Colonial Development Authority has jurisdiction over specimens recovered from corporate mining operations. Through the transparent barrier, the creature had awakened and was watching their conversation with evident distress. Its patches flickered rapidly between blue and red, and Elena could see its small body beginning to tremble. It had lived through enough fear to recognize the tone of a threat, even if it couldn't understand the words. Director Kim, Elena said carefully, this creature has experienced severe trauma. Any transfer at this stage could cause irreversible psychological damage. I strongly recommend delaying relocation until we've established more stable behavioral patterns. Doctor, with respect, your emotional attachment to the specimen is clouding your professional judgment. Our facility has handled dozens of similar cases. The creature will receive proper care while contributing to research that could benefit its entire species. Elena wanted to argue further, but movement in her peripheral vision stopped her. Marcus Chun had entered the holding area with his usual quiet stride, but his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. He approached the barrier where the creature was pressed against the wall in obvious distress. Director Kim noticed him immediately. "And you are?" Marcus knelt beside the barrier without acknowledging her question. The creature responded to his presence by moving closer, its patches shifting to urgent blue-purple patterns Elena was learning to recognize as communication attempts. "Sir, I asked you a question," Director Kim said sharply. Marcus finally looked up, his gray eyes meeting the director's with unsettling intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried quiet authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. "You're frightening it." "Excuse me." Your tone, your body language, your obvious intent to remove it from the only stability it's known since rescue. You're re-traumatizing a being that's barely begun to heal. Director Kim's professional composure cracked slightly. "And who exactly are you to make such assessments? Are you qualified in xenobiology? Do you have credentials in animal psychology?" Marcus stood slowly, his movement deliberate and somehow threatening despite his moderate size. "I'm someone who understands what it means to be caged by people who claim to have your best interests at heart while planning to use you for their own purposes." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Elena realized she was witnessing something more than a disagreement about creature care. This was personal for Marcus in ways she didn't fully understand. "Mr. Chun." Marcus Chun. Director Kim's expression shifted as recognition dawned. She pulled out a tablet and scrolled through information rapidly. Marcus Chun, freelance xenoarchaeologist with gaps in his academic record. "Interesting. You've been present at several facilities during incidents involving specimen transfers." "Have I?" "The Altair Research Station 2 years ago. The Centaur Medical Facility 18 months ago. The Vegan Cultural Center last year. In each case, valuable specimens were relocated or released following complications during your presence." Elena felt pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to arrange themselves. Marcus wasn't just someone with an unusual talent for communicating with traumatized beings. He was someone who actively worked to protect them from exploitation. Director Kim, Commander Hayes interjected, "Perhaps we should discuss the transfer timeline privately. Dr. Vasquez, please continue your observations while Mr. Chun assists." The director clearly wanted to press the issue, but Hayes's tone brooked no argument. She followed him from the holding area, leaving Elena alone with Marcus and the increasingly agitated creature. "You're some kind of activist," Elena said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marcus was already focused on the creature, producing his crystal device to create calming light patterns. "I'm someone who believes beings capable of communication and emotion deserve better than being treated as research specimens." The other facilities Kim mentioned, what happened there? The specimens were relocated to environments better suited to their psychological and social needs. In some cases, that meant specialized sanctuaries. In others, it meant repatriation to their home worlds when possible. Elena watched the creature's patches gradually shift from distressed red to calmer blues as Marcus continued his light display. And when repatriation wasn't possible, Marcus was quiet for several moments. Then, other arrangements were made. "What kind of arrangements?" Instead of answering, Marcus addressed the creature directly. "Little one, I need you to understand something very important. Some people want to take you away from here, away from Dr. Vasquez and the progress you've been making. If that happens, you'll be alone again, and the people caring for you might not understand your needs the way we're learning to." The creature's response was immediate and heartbreaking. Its patches flared brilliant red, and it began the distressed, keening Elena remembered from its early days. But this time, instead of retreating to the far corner, it pressed itself against the barrier near Marcus and began vocalizing in rapid, urgent patterns. "It understands," Elena breathed. "It knows what you're telling it. This species has remarkable cognitive ability. They understand concepts like captivity, freedom, and choice better than most humans give them credit for. The mining corporation on Zirian Prime discovered that before they decided captive specimens were more profitable than free ones. Elena felt sick. They were enslaving an intelligent species. Intelligence is a spectrum, but yes, these beings have complex social structures, problem-solving abilities, and emotional depth that qualifies them for protected status under Galactic Council guidelines. Unfortunately, the Colonial Development Authority operates under different regulations. The creature continued its urgent vocalizations while maintaining contact with the barrier near Marcus. Elena was beginning to recognize patterns in its communication, rhythmic sequences that seemed almost like words, tonal variations that suggested different concepts or emotions. What is it trying to tell us? Marcus listened carefully, his head tilted in concentration. It's describing its pack, its family structure. It's trying to explain that it's not just an individual specimen. It's part of a social network that was destroyed. It's also, he paused, frowning. It's asking about others. Others. It wants to know if any other members of its species survived. It's been alone so long it's desperate for social contact with its own kind. Elena's heart broke a little more. The rescue teams only found this one survivor. The mining operation killed the rest. That's what we assumed, but we might be wrong. These beings are remarkably resourceful. It's possible others escaped and are hiding somewhere on Zirian Prime or nearby systems. Before Elena could respond, Commander Hayes returned alone, his expression grim. Director Kim is making arrangements for transfer within 48 hours. I've negotiated a delay to complete medical documentation, but that's all I could manage. Marcus stood, his jaw tight with controlled anger. 48 hours isn't enough time. Enough time for what? To prepare it for what's coming. To give it the tools it needs to survive another traumatic separation. Elena looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Marcus, what aren't you telling us? He was quiet for a long moment, watching the creature's distressed movements. Finally, he made what appeared to be a difficult decision. Director Kim's facility isn't a research station. It's a breeding program. They want to recreate the species in captivity for eventual use as tracking animals or living weapons. This little one isn't going to receive care. It's going to be used as breeding stock. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. That's monstrous. It's profitable. These beings' natural hunting abilities, intelligence, and loyalty to pack members make them ideal for military applications. The Colonial Development Authority lost a fortune when the Zirian Prime operation failed. They're looking to recoup costs through alternative applications. Commander Hayes looked sick. Do you have proof of this? Enough to know what's happening, not enough to stop it through legal channels. The facility operates under military research exemptions that override standard welfare regulations. Elena stared at the creature, which had stopped vocalizing but remained pressed against the barrier in obvious distress. The idea of this traumatized being forced into breeding programs was unconscionable, but their options seemed impossibly limited. There has to be something we can do. Marcus was studying the holding area with the calculating gaze. Elena was learning to associate with his problem-solving mode. There might be, but it would require violating several regulations and potentially putting your careers at risk. Hayes straightened. Explain. The creature's distress levels are clearly documented. Any competent medical professional could argue that transfer at this time would constitute cruel treatment. If it suffered a medical emergency that required immediate intervention, you're suggesting we fake a medical crisis? Elena asked. I'm suggesting we might not need to fake anything. Look at its stress indicators. Elena checked the monitoring systems and felt her stomach clench. The creature's physiological readings showed dangerous elevation in all stress markers: heart rate, breathing, neural activity, hormonal indicators. Its body was preparing for fight-or-flight responses that could trigger genuine medical complications. It could go into cardiac arrest, she realized. The stress levels are approaching dangerous thresholds. And if that happens during Director Kim's planned transfer, she could be held liable for endangering a protected specimen. That might buy us enough time to explore alternatives. Hayes looked torn between duty and compassion. What kind of alternatives? Marcus was quiet for several moments, clearly weighing his words carefully. There are organizations that specialize in relocating traumatized beings to appropriate environments. Not official government agencies, private groups that operate in the gray areas between corporate regulations and ethical imperatives. You're talking about smuggling it out. I'm talking about ensuring its welfare takes precedence over corporate profits. Elena watched the creature's continued distress and made her decision. What would we need to do? First, we need to stabilize its condition enough to transport it safely. That means continuing the trust-building process and teaching it that not all changes in environment lead to trauma. Second, we need to identify potential destinations, worlds or facilities where it could live safely without being exploited. And third, Marcus met her gaze steadily. We need to decide if we're willing to sacrifice our careers to do what's right. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the recycled air. Elena thought about her years of training, her research goals, her future in xenobiology. Then she looked at the trembling creature and thought about what her career would mean if it was built on the foundation of allowing innocent beings to be exploited. I'm in. Commander Hayes took longer to decide, but finally nodded grimly. What do you need from me? Time and access. We need to continue working with it intensively over the next 36 hours to prepare it for movement. We also need to identify trustworthy crew members who can assist if needed. And after that, we see if we can give one small being a chance at a life that's actually worth living. The creature seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. Its patches shifted to cautious blue-green, and it approached the barrier more closely than ever before. When Marcus knelt beside the wall, it pressed its small paw against the spot where his hand rested on the opposite side. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. This tiny being had survived horrors she couldn't imagine, and now was trusting them to protect it from more of the same. The weight of that trust was both humbling and terrifying. "All right," she said softly. "Let's figure out how to save our friend." Marcus smiled for the first time since she'd met him, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Let's start by teaching it that sometimes, when everything changes, it's because things are about to get better." Over the following hours, they began the delicate process of preparing the creature for what might be its last chance at freedom. The work was intensive, requiring all of Marcus's expertise and Elena's medical knowledge to balance the being's psychological needs with the practical requirements of eventual transport. The creature proved remarkably adaptable when it understood the purpose behind changes. Marcus developed a system of light patterns and vocalizations that seemed to explain concepts like temporary change for long-term safety and movement toward better conditions. The being's intelligence became more apparent as it began responding to increasingly complex communications. Most remarkably, it began exhibiting behaviors Elena recognized as planning and preparation. It organized its few possessions, practiced moving quickly between different areas of its cell, and even began what appeared to be physical conditioning exercises. The creature was preparing itself for escape. As the 48-hour deadline approached, Elena realized they weren't just rescuing a traumatized being. They were working with an intelligent partner who understood the stakes and was willing to take risks for the chance at a better life. The thought was both inspiring and terrifying. If they failed, the consequences would extend far beyond their own careers. They would be betraying the trust of a being that had already suffered too much betrayal. But as she watched Marcus continue his patient communication with her small partner, Elena felt a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. Some choices transcended regulation and career considerations. Some beings deserved protection regardless of the cost. They had less than 24 hours to make it happen. 20 hours remained before Director Kim's scheduled transfer when everything changed in ways none of them anticipated. Elena arrived for her morning shift to find Marcus already in the holding area, but his usual calm demeanor had been replaced by intense focus that set her immediately on edge. "What's wrong?" Marcus gestured toward the creature, which was exhibiting behavior Elena had never observed before. Instead of its typical cautious movements, it was pacing rapidly along the barrier wall, while producing a complex series of vocalizations that seemed almost frantic in their urgency. It's been like this for the past hour. Something's triggered a response I haven't seen before. Elena checked the monitoring systems, expecting to find elevated stress indicators. Instead, she discovered readings that defied her understanding of the creature's psychological patterns. Stress markers were present, but overlaid with neurological activity that suggested extreme excitement rather than distress. This doesn't match any of our previous baselines. It's almost like it's responding to something we can't detect, Marcus finished. He knelt beside the barrier and began his light pattern communication, but the creature barely acknowledged him. Its attention remained fixed on something beyond their perception. Could it be detecting other members of its species? That was my first thought, but there are no other specimens on the station. Unless... Marcus paused, his expression shifting to something approaching wonder. Elena, what's the range on the station's long-distance sensor arrays? Roughly 30 light hours for detailed scans, why? And the Xerian system? Elena's mind raced as she processed the implications. Approximately 18 light hours. Marcus, you don't think. I think we might have been wrong about the number of survivors. Before Elena could respond, Commander Hayes' voice echoed through the station's communication system. All senior staff report to the bridge immediately. We have an unprecedented situation developing. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances before heading for the bridge, leaving the creature to its agitated pacing. The main viewing screen showed long-range sensor displays that revealed something impossible. Multiple ships approaching from the direction of the Xerian system, moving in coordinated formation patterns that suggested intelligence rather than random drift. Commander, Elena said as they entered the bridge, what exactly are we looking at? Hayes turned from the tactical display, his expression a mixture of excitement and concern. Approximately 6 hours ago, our deep space sensors detected energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. The signatures are organic in nature, but clearly artificial in application. Whatever's approaching us is using technology we don't recognize. Dr. Morrison looked up from his analysis station. Commander, the energy patterns are remarkably similar to the bioluminescent signatures we've documented from our rescued specimen. The mathematical relationships are almost identical. Elena felt her understanding of their situation shift dramatically. You're saying the approaching ships are somehow related to our creature species? That's our working theory. The temporal correlation is too significant to ignore. Our specimen began exhibiting unusual behavior approximately 30 minutes before our sensors detected the approaching signatures. Marcus stepped closer to the display, studying the formation patterns with evident fascination. How many vessels are we tracking? 17 distinct signatures, but they're flying in what appears to be familial groupings. 3 larger signatures surrounded by smaller ones, with the entire formation maintaining precise geometric relationships during movement. Pack behavior, Elena realized. They're traveling as family units. That's not all, Hayes continued. We've been monitoring communication attempts directed at our station. The signals are using mathematical progressions and harmonic frequencies that suggest intelligence, but our translation software can't make sense of the content. Marcus was already moving toward the door. I need to get back to our friend. If these are members of its species, it might be able to help us understand what they're trying to communicate. Elena followed him back to the holding area, her mind spinning with implications. If these approaching ships contain survivors of the Xerian Prime massacre, their entire situation had just become exponentially more complex. Director Kim's transfer plans would seem trivial compared to first contact with a previously unknown spacefaring species. The creature's behavior had intensified during their absence. It was now producing vocalizations Elena could only describe as songs, complex melodic patterns that seemed to incorporate mathematical relationships and harmonic structures. Its patches blazed with colors she'd never documented, cycling through what appeared to be deliberate sequences rather than emotional responses. "It's trying to communicate with them," Marcus said with certainty. "Those vocalizations aren't random. They're structured communications using the same mathematical principles our sensors detected." Elena watched in amazement as the creature began creating physical patterns in its cell that corresponded to the formation arrangements of the approaching ships. Using scraps of bedding and food containers, it constructed precise geometric relationships that matched the sensor displays they'd just observed. It knows them. These are its family members. Marcus knelt beside the barrier and began his light pattern communications, but this time the creature responded with obvious impatience. It began gesturing toward the barrier controls, clearly indicating its desire to leave the cell. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, "we need to make a decision right now. In approximately 5 hours, 17 ships containing unknown numbers of intelligent beings are going to arrive at this station. Our friend is clearly trying to communicate with them, and they're probably here because they've been searching for survivors of their people. You're saying we should release it. I'm saying we should trust it. This creature has been traumatized by captivity, but its own people are coming. If we want to establish peaceful first contact, we need to demonstrate that we're not holding their family member prisoner." Elena stared at the creature, which had pressed itself against the barrier and was watching them with obvious intelligence and growing desperation. Every protocol, every regulation, every safety measure demanded they maintain containment until proper procedures could be established. But every instinct she developed as a xenobiologist told her Marcus was right. Commander Hayes will never approve releasing it without proper authorization. Then, we don't ask for authorization. Marcus, that's the right thing to do. Look at it, Elena. It's not an experimental subject or a rescued specimen anymore. It's a being whose family is coming to find it, and with the people standing between them. The weight of the decision pressed down on Elena like a physical force. Release the creature and face court-martial proceedings for violating containment protocols. Keep it confined and potentially sabotage humanity's first contact with a new spacefaring species by appearing to hold their family member hostage. The creature made the decision for her. Its patches suddenly shifted to brilliant gold, and it began producing sounds Elena recognized as the same vocalizations it had directed at Marcus during their first communication attempts. But now those sounds were overlaid with harmonics that seemed to resonate through the station's hull. "It's calling to them," Marcus breathed. "It's telling its family where it is." Alarms began blaring throughout the station as the approaching ships suddenly accelerated their approach. Commander Hayes's voice echoed through the communication system. "All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown vessels are approaching at high velocity. Estimated arrival in 3 hours." Elena looked at the creature, then at Marcus, then at the barrier controls that would either free their friend or potentially doom their careers. The choice was no longer about regulations or protocols. It was about trust and the hope that intelligent beings could recognize good intentions even across species barriers. She reached for the barrier controls. Marcus placed his hand over hers, stopping her motion. "Elena, once we do this, there's no going back. Are you certain this is what you want?" "I'm certain it's what's right." She activated the release sequence, and for the first time in over a month, the barrier between them and the creature dissolved. The being's reaction was immediate and profound. Instead of fleeing or attacking, it approached them slowly with patches cycling through colors that seemed to express overwhelming gratitude. It stopped directly in front of Elena and Marcus, looking up at them with eyes that held intelligence, understanding, and something that looked remarkably like love. Then it began to sing. The vocalizations were unlike anything Elena had ever heard. Complex harmonies that seemed to incorporate mathematical relationships, emotional depth, and pure beauty in ways that transcended species barriers. The creature was sharing its joy, its relief, its gratitude in the only language that mattered. Marcus knelt beside their small friend and carefully extended his hand. The creature approached without hesitation and pressed its small paw against his palm, the first physical contact it had made with any human since its rescue. "Hello, little one," Marcus said softly. "Are you ready to go home?" The creature's response was to begin moving toward the exit, clearly expecting them to follow. Elena realized their friend was taking charge of the situation, preparing to lead them to wherever its family was arriving. "We should probably inform Commander Hayes about what we've done." "Probably. But I think we're about to discover that some decisions are bigger than individual careers or station protocols." They followed the creature through the station's corridors, noting how its behavior changed as they moved closer to the docking bays. Its patches shifted to patterns Elena was learning to recognize as navigational communications. It was somehow tracking the approach of its family's ships and guiding them to the optimal meeting location. Other crew members they encountered stopped and stared at the sight of their supposedly dangerous specimen walking freely through the station, but none attempted to interfere. Something about the creature's obvious purpose and their own protective positions made it clear this was not an escape, but a purposeful movement. They reached the main observation deck, just as the first of the approaching ships became visible without sensor enhancement. Elena's breath caught as she saw vessels unlike anything in human experience. Organic curves that seemed grown rather than built, surfaces that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns their friend displayed, and proportions that suggested both artistic beauty and functional elegance. The creature pressed itself against the observation window and began producing calls that vibrated through the station's hull. Within moments, responding calls echoed from the approaching ships, harmonies that transformed the entire observation deck into a resonating chamber of interspecies communication. "Elena, Marcus, what the hell do you think you're doing?" They turned to find Commander Hayes approaching with what appeared to be half the senior staff in tow. His expression suggested a mixture of fury and fascination as he took in the scene before him. "Commander," Elena began, "we had to make a choice." Her explanation was cut off as the creature suddenly moved to position itself between them and the approaching officers. Its patches shifted to protective patterns Elena recognized from their early observations, and it began producing warning vocalizations that clearly indicated it was preparing to defend its human friends. The gesture was so unexpected and touching that Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. This small being, traumatized by human cruelty and held captive for weeks, had chosen to protect the people who had shown it kindness. Marcus stepped forward and knelt beside their friend. "It's all right, little one. These are good people. They won't hurt us." The creature looked up at him uncertainly before gradually relaxing its protective posture. But it remained positioned between them and the other officers, clearly prepared to intervene if necessary. Commander Hayes stared at the tableau before him, a supposedly dangerous predator actively protecting the people who had allegedly released it without authorization. "Dr. Vasquez, would you care to explain how a traumatized specimen became willing to risk itself to protect you?" "Because it's not a specimen, Commander. It's an intelligent being whose family is coming to find it, and it recognizes that we've been trying to help rather than harm it." Before Hayes could respond, the lead ship in the approaching formation began transmitting directly to the station. The message was unlike anything their communication systems had encountered, layered harmonics that seemed to carry multiple meanings simultaneously. But underlying the complexity was an emotional content that needed no translation. Desperate parents searching for a lost child. The creature responded immediately, pressing itself against the observation window while producing answering calls that resonated with joy and relief. Elena watched the lead ship alter course slightly, moving directly toward their section of the station. "Commander," Dr. Morrison's voice crackled through the intercom, "we're receiving transmission requests on multiple frequencies. The approaching vessels want to communicate, but they're using protocols our systems can't properly interpret." Hayes looked at the creature, which was now practically glowing with excitement as it watched its family's approach. "Dr. Vasquez, do you think our friend here might be able to help us establish proper communication?" Elena knelt beside the creature and spoke softly. "Little one, your family is trying to talk to us, but we don't understand their language. Can you help us learn how to speak with them?" The creature's response was immediate and enthusiastic. It began producing a series of vocalizations, while simultaneously creating light patterns with its patches that seemed to correspond to specific tonal structures. Within minutes, it became clear that their friend was attempting to teach them basic communication protocols. Marcus grabbed a portable recording device and began documenting the creature's lesson. "Elena, it's showing us how their language incorporates multiple sensory channels simultaneously. Audio patterns for basic meaning, but visual patterns for emotional context and relationship indicators. Like a linguistic system that includes body language as a grammatical component. More complex than that. The bioluminescent patterns seem to indicate social status, emotional state, and even temporal relationships. It's trying to teach us how to introduce ourselves respectfully." Over the following hour, their small friend conducted what could only be described as a crash course in interspecies diplomacy. Elena found herself learning not just a new language, but an entirely different approach to communication that emphasized relationship and context over simple information exchange. When the first ship finally docked with the station, the creature was ready to serve as translator and cultural guide for humanity's first formal contact with its species. Elena realized they weren't just witnessing first contact. They were participating in a reunion that had been made possible by choosing trust over protocol. As the docking bay doors opened and larger versions of their small friend began entering the station, Elena felt a profound sense of pride. They had saved more than one traumatized being. They had preserved a family, protected a relationship, and demonstrated that sometimes the most important decisions were the ones that prioritized compassion over regulation. The creature looked up at her and Marcus one final time before running toward its approaching family. Its patches blazed with pure joy as it was surrounded by beings who had clearly never stopped searching for their lost member. Elena watched the reunion and knew that whatever consequences awaited them, they had made the right choice. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant risking everything to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. The small being they had saved was finally home. 6 months after first contact with the Kythera, as Elena learned their species called themselves, the Kepler station had been transformed into something unprecedented, the first joint human-alien research facility in known space. The changes went far beyond structural modifications to accommodate different atmospheric needs and communication systems. The station had become a symbol of what was possible when intelligent species chose cooperation over exploitation. Elena stood in what was now called the Cultural Exchange Center, watching as young Kythera individuals worked alongside human researchers on projects that would have been impossible for either species alone. The integration hadn't been without challenges, but the foundation of trust established through their small friend's rescue had proven stronger than initial cultural misunderstandings. The individual they now knew as Harmony, a name chosen for its linguistic approximation of its actual Kythera designation, had become far more than a survivor. It served as primary cultural liaison between the species, helping navigate the complex process of building relationships across vastly different worldviews. Its early trauma, rather than becoming a barrier to trust, had given it unique insights into the importance of careful, patient relationship building. Marcus approached from across the center, his role having evolved from unofficial helper to chief interspecies communication specialist. The position had been created specifically for him after the Kythera insisted that any formal agreements must include the human who had first understood their lost family member's needs. "The morning briefings are ready," he said, settling beside Elena at their usual observation post. "The council wants to discuss the new exploration protocols." Elena nodded, but her attention remained focused on Harmony, who was currently engaged in what appeared to be a complex discussion with a group of young humans and Kythera. The beings' patches cycled through patterns that Elena had learned indicated teaching modes, patient explanation combined with encouragement for questions, and experimentation. It's remarkable how naturally they work together, she observed. 6 months ago, we thought interspecies communication was impossible without universal translators. Now, they're developing hybrid languages that incorporate elements from both cultures. Harmony's influence, Marcus agreed. Its experience with trauma taught it to be sensitive to misunderstandings before they become conflicts. It's been teaching both groups to read emotional subtext and cultural assumptions. The transformation went beyond communication. Kithera technology operated on principles that human science was only beginning to understand. Biological systems that responded to emotional and psychological states, materials that grew and adapted rather than being manufactured, energy systems that worked in harmony with natural forces rather than dominating them. Human technology, in turn, offered capabilities the Kithera found fascinating. Mathematical modeling systems that could predict outcomes across vast temporal scales, manufacturing techniques that allowed precise replication of complex designs, and communication systems that could maintain coherent signals across interstellar distances. Combined, the two technological approaches were producing innovations neither species had imagined possible. Dr. Morrison joined them at the observation post, carrying data tablets that displayed the week's progress reports. Elena, the psychological assessment data on our Kithera residents shows continued improvement across all metrics. The trauma recovery protocols you developed with Harmony's input are proving remarkably effective. Elena accepted the data, though she maintained her focus on the interaction below. The key insight was understanding that their healing process is fundamentally social. Individual therapy approaches that work for humans are less effective than community-based recovery methods for Kithera. Harmony's family units have been crucial, Marcus added. Having stable social connections made recovery possible in ways that medical intervention alone couldn't achieve. The success of the integrated facility had not gone unnoticed by higher authorities. The Colonial Development Authority had attempted several interventions, but the diplomatic implications of the Kithera alliance had made their usual aggressive approaches impossible. Director Kim had been reassigned to administrative duties after her planned exploitation programs became politically untenable. Commander Hayes approached their group, his expression carrying the mixture of pride and concern that had become his default state since taking responsibility for managing the galaxy's first intentionally integrated facility. The morning council session is about to begin. We're discussing the proposal for expanding the integration program to 3 additional stations. Elena felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. Success brought opportunities, but it also attracted attention from groups whose interests might not align with the careful relationship building they had prioritized. The council chamber had been redesigned to accommodate both human and Kithera communication needs. Traditional seating arrangements had been replaced with flexible spaces that allowed for the movement patterns Kithera used during complex discussions. Bioluminescent panels had been integrated with standard lighting systems to support visual communication channels. Most importantly, the chamber included environmental controls that could adjust atmospheric composition and temperature to support optimal cognitive function for both species. Elena took her position as Chief Xenobiological Consultant, a role that had evolved far beyond her original research focus. Understanding Kithera psychology and social structures had become crucial to every aspect of the facility's operation, from work scheduling to conflict resolution to long-term planning. Marcus settled into the position designated for the communications specialist, while Harmony moved to the central space reserved for cultural liaisons. The small being's presence had become essential to any significant decision-making process, not because of administrative authority, but because of its unique ability to identify potential misunderstandings before they created problems. The Kithera council members arranged themselves in the flowing patterns that indicated formal discussion mode. Elena had learned to recognize the subtle differences between casual conversation arrangements and the more structured formations used for important decision-making. The mathematical precision of their movements reflected the same principles that guided their technology and social organization. Senior Coordinator Resonance. Elena still struggled with translating Kithra names into human phonemes. Began the session with harmonic patterns that established the meeting's emotional tone and priority level. The translation systems have been refined to provide both semantic content and contextual information, though Elena suspected they still missed nuances that would take years to fully understand. The proposal before us today involves expanding our integration model to facilities in the Centauri system, the Vega colony, and the Altair Research Station. Resonance communicated through the combined audiovisual channels that characterized formal Kithra discourse. Before proceeding, we must evaluate whether our success here can be replicated without compromising the essential principles that have made cooperation possible. Commander Hayes responded using the modified protocols they had developed for human participation in Kithra discussions. The expansion proposal includes comprehensive cultural preparation for all participating facilities. No integration would proceed without extensive training in Kithra social structures and communication methods. Elena noted the subtle shift in Harmony's bioluminescent patterns that indicated concern or reservation. The young being had developed remarkable sensitivity to the implications of rapid expansion, perhaps because its early trauma had taught it to recognize when good intentions might lead to harmful outcomes. Harmony, Elena addressed their cultural liaison directly. What concerns do you have about the expansion timeline? The small being's response incorporated the patient explanation patterns it had perfected through months of cross-cultural education. The success we have achieved here required many cycles of patient relationship building. Rushing to expand before deep understanding is established may create the appearance of cooperation without the essential foundation of trust. Marcus nodded understanding. You're concerned that administrative pressure to show rapid results might compromise the careful processes that made our integration work. Harmony's insight is crucial, Resonance added. Our species has experienced the consequences of premature cooperation attempts. Surface-level agreements that lack deep mutual understanding often create more problems than they solve. Elena reviewed the expansion proposal data, noting the ambitious timelines and efficiency metrics that characterize bureaucratic planning. The documents emphasized quantifiable outcomes and standardized procedures, approaches that directly contradicted the personalized, relationship-based methods that had made Kepler Station successful. The proposal assumes our integration model can be packaged into a replicable program, she observed. But what we've built here isn't a program. It's a community that developed through specific relationships between specific individuals. Exactly, Marcus agreed. Each facility would need to develop its own approach based on the personalities and cultural backgrounds of its participants. Cookie-cutter implementation would almost certainly fail. The discussion continued for several hours, with Kithra and human participants working through the complex implications of expansion. Elena found herself appreciating anew the sophistication of Kithra decision-making processes, which incorporated multiple perspectives and long-term thinking in ways that human bureaucratic systems often struggled to achieve. Ultimately, they reached a consensus that reflected the careful balance between ambition and wisdom that had characterized their entire partnership. Expansion would proceed, but slowly and with extensive preparation. Each new facility would develop its own integration approach with guidance from Kepler Station, but without rigid adherence to predetermined models. Most importantly, Harmony and several other cultural liaisons would travel to prospective facilities to assess readiness and provide training in cross-cultural communication techniques. The young being that had once been too traumatized to allow human approach would now serve as a teacher and guide for expanding interspecies cooperation. After the formal session ended, Elena found herself alone with Harmony in the quiet space they had established for informal conversations. The small being had requested this time together, using communication patterns that suggested both gratitude and something approaching nostalgia. Elena, Harmony began, using the careful pronunciation it had developed for human names. I have been considering the path that brought us to this moment. Oh, what thoughts have you been having? Harmony's patches shifted to the warm golden color Elena associated with its deepest moments of emotional expression. When you first approached my containment area, I believed all humans were like those who had harmed my family. Fear made me unable to recognize kindness when it was offered. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came with memories of those early days. You had every reason to be afraid. The humans you had encountered before gave you no cause to trust our species. But you and Marcus persisted in offering kindness even when I could not accept it. You chose to risk your safety and status to protect someone who had given you nothing in return. You had given us something, harmony. You had given us the chance to do better than those who came before us. The small being approached closer than it ever had during their early interactions, close enough that Elena could see the intricate patterns within its bioluminescent patches. I have been thinking about the nature of courage. I believed courage meant surviving alone, protecting myself by rejecting all offers of connection. But you showed me that true courage means choosing trust despite the risk of betrayal. Elena knelt to bring herself closer to Harmony's eye level. You showed us something important too. You demonstrated that healing is possible even after terrible trauma, and that broken trust can be rebuilt if people are willing to be patient and consistent in their kindness. Harmony's patches cycled through patterns Elena had learned to recognize as deep contemplation. The expansion of our cooperation will help many individuals of both species. But I believe the most important outcome is the proof that differences in biology and culture need not prevent the formation of meaningful bonds between intelligent beings. You've become quite the philosopher, Elena observed with gentle humor. Marcus says that survival often requires developing wisdom about relationships and trust. My early experiences taught me about the consequences of broken trust. My experiences here have taught me about the possibilities that emerge when trust is honored. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the activities in the Cultural Exchange Center through the observation windows. Young humans and Kithara continued their collaborative projects, their easy interactions providing living proof of what could be accomplished when fear was replaced by curiosity and respect. Elena, Harmony said eventually, "I have a request to make." "Of course. What do you need?" "When I travel to the new facilities to help with expansion preparations, I would like you and Marcus to accompany me. Not because I cannot manage the responsibilities alone, but because I believe our story together demonstrates the principles we hope to teach." Elena felt a surge of pride, mixed with deep affection for the remarkable being who had grown from a traumatized refugee into a leader in interspecies cooperation. "Harmony, I would be honored to continue working with you." As the months that followed would prove, their partnership had indeed become something larger than the sum of its parts. The expansion to new facilities succeeded precisely because it was guided by the principles of patience, respect, and genuine care for individual well-being that had characterized their original work together. The small being that had once snarled at every approach had become a bridge between worlds, teaching countless individuals that the choice between fear and trust was perhaps the most important decision any intelligent being could make. And in teaching others, Harmony had demonstrated that healing trauma was not just about recovering from past wounds, but about building the strength to create better relationships in the future. Elena often reflected on the moment when she had chosen to release the barrier that kept Harmony confined. That decision had seemed risky at the time, but it had proven to be the beginning of something extraordinary. Proof that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from studying subjects, but from choosing to trust them as equals. The galaxy was a larger, more complex place than any of them had imagined. But it was also a place where intelligence and compassion could build bridges across any divide, one relationship at a time. The abused cub that had pressed close to a silent human had grown into something magnificent, a leader, a teacher, and a living testament to the transformative power of choosing love over fear.